Aisha had always been the kind of girl people rarely noticed. In her school, the loud voices and flashy personalities often stole the spotlight, while quiet students like her blended into the background. She didn't mind this. In fact, she preferred it that way. She liked to spend her time observing rather than speaking, listening rather than shouting, and thinking before acting. Every morning, she walked into school with her neatly packed bag, a couple of notebooks, and her lunchbox that her mother prepared lovingly. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore her uniform in the most ordinary way possible. She was never late, never noisy, and never tried to attract attention. Most students around her thought she was just a quiet, shy girl who avoided people because she was afraid. But the truth was different. Aisha's silence was not weakness, it was strength. She believed in choosing her words carefully and saving her energy for things that mattered. Still, this made her an easy target for those who loved mocking others. The cafeteria was one of the noisiest places in school. Every day, during lunch break, hundreds of students filled the large hall. The sound of laughter, shouting, chairs scraping, and trays clattering made it impossible to hear your own thoughts. Aisha always sat at the far corner, away from the chaos. She liked to finish her meal slowly, reading a book or sketching in her notebook. For her, the corner seat felt safe. But safety was not something permanent in a place full of restless teenagers. Among the many groups in the cafeteria, there was one led by Jason. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who loved being in control. Jason was known as the school's loudest bully. He had a group of friends who laughed at his jokes and followed him like shadows. He enjoyed picking on those who seemed weaker, especially the ones who didn't talk back. For weeks, Jason had been watching Aisha. To him, she looked like the perfect target. She was always alone, never argued with anyone, and avoided conflicts. In Jason's eyes, that meant she was powerless. He made small remarks whenever he passed her table, a whispered insult here, a mocking laugh there. Aisha ignored him, keeping her focus on her food or her book. She believed ignoring him would end his interest. But Jason was not someone who stopped easily. He liked an audience, and when his friends were around, he wanted to put on a show. To him, humiliating Aisha would be entertaining. One Thursday afternoon, the cafeteria was louder than usual. A group of students was celebrating a sports victory, and the energy was high. Jason spotted Aisha at her usual corner, quietly eating rice and vegetables her mother had packed. He smirked and whispered to his friends, "Watch this. I'm going to wake the sleeping mouse." His friends chuckled, already excited about what was about to happen. Aisha noticed Jason's glance but didn't react. She had grown used to ignoring him. She thought if she kept calm, he would lose interest. She didn't realize that Jason was preparing something more dramatic this time. He walked toward the food counter, picked up a tray loaded with soup, fries, and juice, and carried it with exaggerated care. His friends followed closely, whispering and laughing. A few students noticed the group and turned their heads to watch, sensing something was about to happen. Aisha, however, kept her eyes on her plate. She slowly ate, trying not to draw attention. Deep inside, though, she felt the tension in the air. She could sense the shift, the way whispers turned into giggles, the way footsteps moved closer toward her corner. She had learned to read people's movements, to predict actions before they happened, a skill she had picked up during her martial arts training. Yes, Aisha trained in martial arts. Outside school, away from the noise and gossip, she spent evenings in her uncle's small training center. Her uncle was a retired coach who believed that discipline, patience, and self-control were more powerful than brute strength. Under his guidance, Aisha had learned not just how to defend herself, but also how to stay calm under pressure. She had practiced countless hours, perfecting her balance, timing, and focus. But Aisha never spoke of this at school. To her, martial arts was not something to boast about. It was her private strength, her quiet world where she grew without anyone noticing. Jason finally reached her table. He stood right in front of her, holding the tray slightly tilted, making the food wobble dangerously close to the edge. His friends formed a half circle, eager to see the drama unfold. "Hey, quiet girl," Jason said loudly, so half the cafeteria could hear. "Why don't you try some new food today? Don't worry, I'll serve it for you." The students nearby laughed. Some leaned closer, curious to see if Aisha would finally react. But Aisha didn't move. She calmly set her fork down and looked up at Jason, her expression steady and unreadable. Jason grinned, mistaking her silence for fear. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Or are you too shy to say thank you?" he teased, lifting the tray a little higher as if preparing to pour it all over her. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Aisha's calm eyes locked on his, and she spoke for the first time that day, her voice low but firm. "Put it down, Jason." The words were simple, but the way she said them made some students blink in surprise. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't fear. It was a command. Jason laughed, shaking his head. "Or what? What are you going to do, quiet girl?" He tilted the tray further, letting a few fries slip over the edge. His friends roared with laughter, expecting the next moment to be a complete mess. But Aisha's eyes never left his. Her breathing was steady, her shoulders relaxed, and her mind razor sharp. She wasn't scared. She was waiting. The cafeteria buzzed with suspense. Every student nearby could feel that something unusual was about to happen. They didn't know it yet, but Jason had just made a mistake, a big one. Jason stood there with the tray in his hands, smiling proudly as if he had already won. His friends leaned closer, laughing and nudging one another. To them, this was just another one of Jason's games, something to make the lunch break more fun. The students nearby fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. Aisha, however, stayed calm. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, and didn't show any signs of fear. Instead, she sat still, her eyes fixed on Jason's movements. On the outside, she appeared like the same quiet girl everyone thought she was. But on the inside, her thoughts were sharp and clear. She remembered what her uncle always told her during training: a strong person doesn't need to start a fight. A strong person knows when to wait, when to speak, and when to act. But if someone crosses the line, you must defend yourself with control, not with anger. Jason didn't know any of this. He thought Aisha was too shy, too soft, to do anything about his prank. He tilted the tray again, letting the soup slide dangerously close to the edge. "You sit here every day like a little mouse," he said loudly, his voice echoing across the cafeteria. "Maybe it's time the mouse got a taste of real food." Laughter erupted from his friends. A few students from other tables turned their heads, whispering among themselves. "Poor girl," someone muttered. "She's not going to do anything." But Aisha's calm voice surprised everyone again. "Jason, I told you. Put it down." The way she said it wasn't loud, yet it carried across the table with firmness. It was not the voice of someone pleading. It was the voice of someone who meant what she said. Jason blinked, taken aback for just a second. Then he grinned, determined to prove his power. "Oh, I'll put it down, all right," he sneered, raising the tray higher. His friends leaned in, waiting for the food to spill. But before Jason could act, the unexpected happened. With a swift, almost invisible movement, Aisha stood up from her seat. She didn't push him or shove him. Instead, she shifted her weight lightly, brushing past the edge of the tray with her hand. The tray slipped sideways, and the food tumbled but not onto her. The soup, the fries, and the juice spilled across the floor, splashing onto Jason's shoes and legs. The crowd gasped. Jason froze in shock, staring down at the mess around him. His friends stopped laughing. For the first time, Jason didn't look like he was in control. Aisha stood still, her expression calm, her hands by her side. She hadn't hurt him, hadn't yelled, hadn't even touched him directly. Yet somehow, she had turned the whole situation around. "You should be more careful," she said softly, her voice steady. "Playing with food doesn't make you strong. It just makes you foolish." The cafeteria fell into silence. Students exchanged wide-eyed glances. They had never heard Aisha speak like this before. She wasn't shouting, wasn't angry, but there was something powerful in her tone that made even the noisiest group pause. Jason's face turned red. His pride had been hurt in front of everyone. He kicked at the spilled food angrily and threw the empty tray aside. "You think you're smart, huh?" he snapped. "You think you can embarrass me?" Aisha shook her head gently. "I don't need to embarrass you, Jason. You're doing it yourself." Her words stung more than anything else. The crowd of students murmured, some covering their mouths to hide their laughter. Jason clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. For him, this wasn't just about a tray of food anymore. This was about pride, reputation, and control. And right now, he felt like it was slipping through his fingers. His friends whispered to him, "Come on, don't let her talk to you like that. Show her who's boss." Jason nodded, stepping closer to Aisha. "You think you're tough because you moved a tray," he growled. "Let's see how tough you really are." Aisha didn't move. She stood tall, her eyes watching his every step. Her posture was relaxed but alert, just like her uncle had taught her. She wasn't looking for a fight, but she was ready if he pushed her too far. Jason raised his hand, as if to shove her shoulder. The crowd gasped again. Some students even stood up from their tables, unsure whether to call a teacher or wait to see what would happen. But before Jason's hand could land, Aisha stepped aside quickly, letting his own momentum carry him forward. He stumbled, nearly losing his balance, and the crowd laughed nervously. Jason spun around, furious. "Stand still," he shouted. Aisha shook her head. "Why should I? If you're trying to push me, then you'll only end up pushing yourself." Her calmness was making him angrier. Jason swung his arm again, trying to grab her this time. Aisha leaned back, avoiding his reach, and then gently tapped his wrist, redirecting his hand away. The move was simple, but it looked effortless. Jason was left grabbing at empty air. Gasps filled the cafeteria again. Some students whispered, "She knows how to fight." "Did you see that?" Jason growled in frustration. "Stop moving around and face me," he barked. Aisha looked at him calmly. "I am facing you. But I'm not here to fight. You're the only one fighting yourself." Her words cut deep, because the truth was clear for everyone watching. Jason was losing control, while Aisha remained calm and composed. The audience saw the difference. One person was driven by anger, the other by focus. By now, the cafeteria doors had opened, and a teacher had walked in after hearing the commotion. But before the teacher could even reach them, the scene had already shifted. Jason stood there, panting with rage, while Aisha stood steady, her breathing calm. "Is something wrong here?" the teacher asked firmly. Jason quickly stepped back, trying to hide his frustration. "No, nothing," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. Aisha simply shook her head politely. "Nothing important, sir." The teacher narrowed his eyes, suspicious, but decided to let it go for the moment. He ordered Jason to clean up the spilled food and told the rest of the students to get back to their seats. Slowly, the cafeteria returned to its noisy atmosphere, though the whispers and curious glances continued. Aisha sat back down quietly, picking up her lunchbox as though nothing had happened. She didn't need applause or attention. She had handled the situation with control, and that was enough for her. but for the rest of the students, the image stayed fresh in their minds. The quiet girl who never spoke had just stood up to Jason without raising her voice, without throwing a punch, and without losing her calm. For the first time, people began to wonder, who exactly was Aisha, and how did she know how to handle herself so well? As for Jason, his pride had taken a heavy blow. He sat with his friends, trying to laugh it off, but deep inside he was boiling with anger. He wasn't going to let this go. He promised himself he would find another way to put Aisha in her place. Little did he know, every plan he made would only lead him to another mistake. Because Aisha was not the weak, helpless girl he thought she was. She was far more than that. The next day, the whole school was still buzzing about what had happened in the cafeteria. Word traveled fast in hallways, and by the time Aisha entered her first class, whispers had already filled the air. That quiet girl embarrassed Jason. She didn't even yell, but he couldn't touch her. I think she knows some kind of training. Did you see how she moved? Aisha ignored the gossip. She walked to her desk, sat down, and opened her notebook, as if nothing unusual had happened. She didn't care about the attention. To her, what happened yesterday was just a moment where she had to protect herself with calmness. Nothing more. But for Jason, it was different. His pride had been bruised in front of everyone. For years, he had been feared and respected as the strongest in school, the one no one dared to oppose. But now, people were laughing behind his back. His friends teased him, though carefully, because they didn't want to become his next target. Jason couldn't forget the way Aisha had looked at him, calm, steady, almost like she wasn't afraid at all. That made him furious. He wanted to prove that he was still in control, that no one could embarrass him and get away with it. During lunch break, he gathered his friends. "We're not finished," he said through clenched teeth. "She thinks she's smarter than me. Fine. Let's see what she does when I turn up the pressure." His friends cheered him on. They liked the drama. They didn't care about right or wrong, they just wanted excitement. To them, Aisha was still just a quiet girl, and Jason was still the one who ran the cafeteria. When lunch started, Jason walked into the cafeteria with his group, louder than ever. He slammed his tray onto his table, drawing attention to himself. Then, without even touching his food, he stood up and walked straight toward Aisha's corner. The crowd noticed instantly. Forks stopped clinking, conversations froze, and heads turned. Everyone knew something was about to happen again. Aisha sat calmly in her usual spot. She was reading a book this time, her lunch untouched. She had already guessed Jason wouldn't let the matter go. She had seen the anger in his eyes yesterday, and she knew he wouldn't be satisfied until he tried again. Jason slammed his hand down on her table, making the book shake. "Hey, quiet girl," he said in a mocking tone, "you think you embarrassed me yesterday? That was nothing. Today, I'll show you what happens when you disrespect me." The cafeteria filled with nervous whispers. Some students wanted to call a teacher, but others couldn't look away. It was like watching a storm form in the middle of the room. Aisha looked up slowly, her eyes calm as always. "Jason, this isn't about respect. It's about your pride. And pride can blind you if you're not careful." Her words, soft yet sharp, made Jason's face darken. "You think you're wise now? You think you can lecture me?" He leaned closer, trying to intimidate her. But Aisha didn't move back. She didn't blink. She simply closed her book and set it aside, as if preparing herself. Jason's hand shot forward, aiming to grab her arm. The crowd gasped again. But Aisha reacted instantly. She shifted her chair back and gently twisted her wrist, moving his grip away before it could land. Jason stumbled slightly, his hand closing on nothing but air. The students around them gasped in disbelief. Some even clapped quietly. "Did you see that?" She avoided it like she knew it was coming. Jason grew angrier. He tried again, this time swinging his arm as if to block her escape. But Aisha's movements were smoother, quicker. She sidestepped, letting his arm pass by, and placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. With a small push, she redirected his energy, making him stumble forward a step. The cafeteria erupted with whispers and laughter. Jason's face turned red. He felt like the whole world was mocking him. "Stop moving! Fight me properly," he shouted. Aisha shook her head gently. "I don't need to fight you. You're already fighting yourself." Her calm voice carried across the room, and students couldn't help but admire her courage. Here was a girl who never sought attention, standing against the loudest bully in school without fear. Jason's frustration boiled over. He clenched his fists and lunged toward her in anger. But Aisha was ready. She stepped aside smoothly, and Jason's momentum nearly made him fall. Before he could recover, Aisha raised her hand, not to strike, but to stop him in place. "Enough," she said firmly. "You're not proving anything by doing this. All you're showing is how little control you have." The cafeteria fell silent. Her words hung in the air, heavy and true. Jason's chest heaved as he stood frozen, unsure what to do next. For the first time, he felt small in front of someone who wasn't even trying to hurt him. At that moment, a teacher rushed in, alerted by the noise. "What is going on here?" the teacher demanded. Jason quickly stepped back, his fists lowering. "Nothing," he muttered, avoiding the teacher's gaze. The teacher looked at him sternly, then at Aisha, who stood calmly by her table. "Jason, this is the second time in 2 days. You're on thin ice. Sit down and eat your lunch, or you'll be in the principal's office." Jason obeyed reluctantly, stomping back to his table. His friends avoided looking at him, afraid of his anger. Aisha quietly sat back down and opened her lunch. She ate slowly, as if nothing had happened, though inside she knew things had changed. The students who watched her with surprise and admiration would never look at her the same way again. For the rest of lunch, whispers filled the air. "She's not just quiet, she's strong. She's making Jason look powerless. Where did she learn to move like that?" Jason sat at his table, his food untouched, his pride burning hotter than ever. He wasn't used to losing, especially not in front of the entire cafeteria. His jaw tightened as he made a silent promise: this wasn't over. He would find another way to regain his power. But no matter what he planned, he didn't realize that every attempt he made would only dig him deeper. Because Aisha wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't fighting for attention. She was simply standing her ground, showing everyone that silence doesn't mean weakness. And for the first time, the school began to see Jason not as the strongest boy in the room, but as someone who had finally met his match, a match he couldn't understand, and maybe never would. The days following the cafeteria incident were filled with whispers, curious glances, and quiet conversations in the hallways. Aisha noticed the change almost immediately. Students who once ignored her now looked at her with respect, and some even with awe. She heard bits of conversations as she walked past groups. She didn't even touch him, but Jason couldn't lay a hand on her. "She's calm like she's trained for this her whole life. I think she's stronger than she looks. Maybe she knows some martial arts." Aisha, however, paid little attention to the rumors. She continued with her daily routine as if nothing had changed. She attended her classes, sat in her usual corner during lunch, and kept her focus on her books and sketches. For her, life had not changed at all. But for Jason, everything was different. Jason's pride was wounded. He felt like his reputation was slipping away, replaced by quiet admiration for Aisha. His friends didn't laugh as freely around him anymore. In fact, some of them seemed hesitant to follow his lead. And that was the part Jason couldn't accept. He had built his entire presence in school on fear and control, and now it was cracking because of one girl who had never even raised her voice. At home, Jason couldn't stop replaying the scenes in his mind, the way Aisha had moved so calmly, the way her words had cut through his anger. He slammed his fists against his pillow at night, frustrated that he had been made to look weak. "She's just a quiet girl," he muttered to himself, "how can she make me look like a fool?" He decided he needed to act again, but this time, not with food or simple shoves. He wanted to show the whole school that he was still the one in control. But deep down, there was a growing fear inside him, fear he couldn't admit to anyone, that maybe Aisha was not someone he could defeat easily. The next week, another chance arrived. The school was holding a charity sports event in the gymnasium. Students from all grades were gathered, and the atmosphere was lively. Teachers and volunteers were busy arranging activities, while students filled the bleachers, cheering and laughing. Jason saw this as the perfect stage. With so many people watching, he could win back the attention he had lost. He spotted Aisha sitting near the back row with a few classmates, quietly observing the games. She wasn't cheering loudly like others, but her presence still stood out to Jason. He walked over, his friends trailing behind him. "Enjoying the games, quiet girl?" he asked, loud enough for others to hear. Aisha looked up, calm as always. "Yes. They're fun to watch." Jason smirked. "How about you? Do you want to join? Or are you too scared to show what you can do?" The students around them turned their heads. Some whispered, "Here we go again." Others leaned forward, eager to see what would happen. Aisha set her notebook aside. "Jason, this isn't the place," she said softly. But Jason was determined. He pointed toward the open space where a few students were setting up mats for a friendly demonstration. "Perfect spot. Why don't you and I have a little challenge? Nothing serious. Just to see who's stronger." The crowd murmured with excitement. A teacher supervising nearby raised an eyebrow but allowed it, thinking it was just harmless fun between students. Aisha stood slowly, brushing off her skirt. She could have refused. She didn't like showing off, and she didn't care about proving anything. But she also knew Jason wouldn't stop until he was taught a lesson he couldn't ignore. With a small nod, she walked to the center. The crowd grew louder, cheering and clapping. "Aisha versus Jason," someone shouted. Phones came out of pockets, students eager to record what they thought would be an entertaining moment. Jason cracked his knuckles, grinning at the audience. "Get ready to see the real champion," he boasted. Aisha took her place opposite him. Her stance wasn't aggressive. She stood with her feet slightly apart, her arms relaxed, her face calm. She remembered her uncle's teachings: control the moment. Don't let anger guide you. Show your strength through discipline. The challenge began. Jason charged forward quickly, aiming to push her off balance. But Aisha moved smoothly, stepping aside and guiding his arm past her. The crowd gasped and clapped. Jason stumbled, his face growing red. He tried again, this time with more force. Aisha ducked lightly, redirecting his momentum. He nearly fell again, his balance slipping. The audience laughed nervously, amazed at how easily she avoided his moves. "Fight me properly!" Jason shouted in frustration. "I already am," Aisha replied gently. "But fighting doesn't always mean hitting. Sometimes it means showing control." Her words carried through the gym, and the crowd grew silent for a moment. Then came the cheers. Students were beginning to see that strength wasn't just about power, it was about calmness, focus, and skill. Jason, however, refused to accept defeat. He lunged again, faster, but Aisha countered with a simple block, placing her palm near his shoulder and stopping him mid-motion. He froze, realizing he couldn't move without falling. The crowd gasped louder than ever. For a moment, Jason's eyes widened. He felt trapped, not hurt, but outmatched. Aisha looked him in the eyes and spoke clearly, so everyone could hear. Strength is not about making others feel small. It's about knowing yourself and protecting what's right. You're strong, Jason, but you're wasting it on pride. That's why you'll never win this way. The gym fell silent. Her words struck deeper than any physical move. Jason felt his pride shatter under the weight of the truth. Slowly, Aisha released her hold and stepped back, allowing him to regain his balance. The teacher stepped in then, clapping his hands. That's enough. Good demonstration, both of you. Let's move on with the games. The crowd erupted with cheers, but their admiration was directed at Aisha. Students clapped, some even standing to applaud. Jason stepped back to his side of the gym, his head low, his pride wounded once more. Aisha quietly returned to her seat, picking up her notebook as if nothing had happened. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate, and didn't look for attention. She had done what she needed to do. She had shown Jason and the entire school that silence was not weakness, and calmness could be the greatest strength of all. For the rest of the day, the event continued as planned, but the memory of that moment stayed in everyone's minds. Jason sat quietly, something rare for him, while his friends avoided speaking too much. Students who once laughed at Aisha's quiet nature now looked at her with admiration. Jason had tried to prove his strength, but in the end, he had only proven Aisha's. And though he would never admit it, somewhere deep inside, he began to feel respect for her, the quiet girl who had shown him a lesson he would never forget. The sports event ended, but the memory of what happened between Aisha and Jason did not fade. By the next morning, the entire school was talking about it. Everywhere in the hallways, students whispered to one another. She stood in front of Jason like it was nothing. She didn't even get angry, but he couldn't touch her. She's not just quiet, she's strong. For the first time, Aisha's name was being spoken with respect instead of curiosity. Students who used to pass her by without a glance now smiled when they saw her. Some even greeted her politely, a simple hi or good morning. It was strange to her at first, but she responded with her usual calmness. She didn't seek popularity. She didn't want to be the center of attention. All she wanted was to live peacefully, focus on her studies, and spend her evenings training in her uncle's gym. Yet somehow, life had pushed her into the spotlight, and everyone now saw her differently. Jason, on the other hand, felt the change even more deeply. He walked through the halls with heavy steps, hearing the whispers behind his back. His friends no longer followed him as eagerly as before. Some avoided eye contact, not wanting to be dragged into his prideful battles again. For the first time in years, Jason felt something unfamiliar: isolation. He couldn't forget the moment when Aisha had stopped him with just one calm gesture, or the way her words had echoed in the gym. Strength is not about making others feel small. It's about knowing yourself and protecting what's right. Those words played over and over in his mind. At first, they made him angry. But the more he thought about them, the more they unsettled him. Was she right? Had he been wasting his strength on pride instead of using it for something meaningful? A week passed. Jason stayed quiet during lunch, something unusual for him. He didn't tease others, didn't start fights, and didn't throw his weight around. Students noticed, but they didn't dare ask him about it. He was too proud to admit it, but inside, Jason was struggling with the truth. One afternoon, he spotted Aisha in the library. She was sitting alone at a corner table, her books spread out neatly, her pencil moving across a page. He hesitated for a long time before walking over. When he finally did, his footsteps were heavy with hesitation. Aisha looked up, her calm eyes meeting his. She didn't flinch, didn't frown, and didn't look surprised. She simply closed her book and waited. Jason cleared his throat. For the first time, his voice was not loud or mocking. It was low, almost uneasy. "Can I sit here?" Aisha nodded, motioning to the empty chair across from her. Jason sat down slowly, his hands resting on the table. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, but unlike before, it wasn't filled with tension. Finally, Jason let out a deep sigh. "I don't get it," he muttered. "Why didn't you fight me back? Anyone else would have hit me, or shouted, or done something. But you didn't. You just kept stopping me without hurting me." Aisha tilted her head slightly. "Because fighting you wouldn't solve anything. If I hit you, it would only make you angrier. And anger doesn't teach lessons. It only makes the problem bigger." Jason stared at her, confused but thoughtful. "But you made me look weak in front of everyone." Aisha shook her head gently. "I didn't make you look weak. Your anger did. All I did was show you what happens when someone stays calm while the other loses control." Jason leaned back in his chair, her words hitting him harder than he expected. For years, he had believed that strength meant being feared, being the loudest, and being the one no one dared to oppose. But in just 2 weeks, Aisha had shattered that belief without ever throwing a punch. He lowered his gaze. Maybe I've been doing this wrong." Aisha offered a small, kind smile. "It's not too late to change. Strength is still your gift. You just need to decide how to use it." Jason looked at her, unsure what to say. But for the first time, he felt something he had never felt toward her before: respect. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. Jason stopped trying to control the cafeteria with his jokes and pranks. He still had his loud voice and confident walk, but he used them differently. Instead of mocking others, he started cheering during sports games. Instead of pushing students aside, he began helping younger kids carry their heavy bags. His transformation wasn't instant, and not everyone believed it at first, but slowly, people noticed the change. Aisha, as always, stayed quiet. She didn't tell anyone about their conversation in the library. She didn't take credit for Jason's change. She just continued being herself, calm and steady, proving that true strength never needed to be shouted, it could be felt in silence. By the end of the school year, the story of the cafeteria incident had become something of a legend. Students told it to newcomers, not as a tale of a fight, but as a lesson. They spoke about the quiet girl who stood against the loudest bully without anger, and how her calm strength turned the tables. For Jason, the lesson stayed with him. He never became best friends with Aisha, but he no longer saw her as someone weak. He knew better now. In fact, whenever he passed her in the hallway, he gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the respect he had learned to carry. Aisha, for her part, never sought recognition. She continued to train in her uncle's gym, continued to sketch in her notebook, and continued to live quietly. But inside, she carried the knowledge that her silence had spoken louder than any fight ever could. And for everyone who had witnessed it, the message was clear: never mistake quietness for weakness. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one with the greatest strength.